Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
What's the one thing that a dental office can't survive without? Or to put it another way, beyond equipment and supplies, what's the single most basic requirement for any dental practice? It's a fairly obvious answer. A dentist. In theory, you could have an office with just a dentist doing all the work, including the administrative work from scheduling to filing insurance. I've known a few doctors who have done that. It wasn't a great idea, and so on. Wouldn't be all that productive, and I imagine the doctor would be fairly stressed out, but it would still qualify as a dental office. So what does this tell us with relation to staff, your team? Well, essentially, by building a team, you've taken some of your duties, functions, and most importantly, responsibilities that would ultimately belong to you. And you've delegated these things to them, your team. Because again, if it all went by the wayside, you could theoretically still function as a dental practice with just a doctor. It wouldn't be all that fun, but it would still theoretically be possible. So why do we have a team? It's fairly obvious. We want practice growth. We want to increase profitability, better patient care and service, less stress, and the fun of working as a part of a group. I could go on, but I think we know that a team is important. So if this is the case, this is why we have a team. It's supposed to be this really rewarding thing. Why is it that the primary complaints we tend to hear from new clients are usually staff related? Things like, I can't seem to get my staff to do things the way I want them done, or they're unable to execute what I ask them to do. They don't seem very interested. They don't take things as seriously as I do, or they don't have the same sense of importance, accountability, or urgency that I do. We had a bad month or a bad day, and it doesn't seem like a big deal to them. Well, if I were to look at these issues, what would be the common denominator with each? Well, it would go back to problems with a word I used about 15 sentences ago, delegation. And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode, how to delegate effectively so as to spur practice growth. My name is Jeff Bloomberg and I'm your host, and we're going to do a deep dive on this subject. We may break the 30-minute barrier, and we're going to look at a number of things. We're going to look at the 4 reasons why you delegate. We're going to look at when it's appropriate to delegate, including when to hire somebody new. We're going to look at the 6 biggest problems or issues people run into with delegation. And then we're going to look at how to delegate effectively. So let's just jump right into this. Let's start with why you would delegate. Why is this important? Well, number 1 would be growth. You're not going to be able to grow if it's just you or you and a dental assistant. You're going to need more staff. So you increase productivity by replicating yourself, or at least a part of yourself, with your staff. This also applies with an office manager. Let's say it's you and an office manager, and your office is growing and your office manager starts bringing in more team members, for reception or scheduling or whatever. Essentially, he or she is replicating themselves on those individual jobs. Okay. But the reason you're doing that is you're expecting to see an increase in growth or revenues. Next, obviously, is we'd reduce stress and overwork. If you have one person doing the equivalent of 3 full-time jobs, they're eventually going to burn out. And then you've got none persons doing 3 full-time jobs, and then you're in trouble. So you don't want people completely chronically overloaded. It's not rewarding or a fun level of existence to operate that way. Number 3 is proper delegation actually builds a stable long-term team that you retain. And let me explain this. So, because part of it is I'm a fan of, you want to continuously strive with each and every employee you bring in to build up a competent core of people. Okay. So every employee you've brought on, you've got this idea. I'm going to keep this person for the long term, and you sort of want to move them up within the organization. You want people who are going to be with you for a long time. That's the thought we have with everybody. It doesn't always work out, but that's what we're attempting to achieve with everybody. Now, why is this cool? If, let's say you have a lead assistant that's been with you for 10 years, you'll find it's a lot easier. Let's say you have a lead assistant and 3 additional dental assistants. You'll notice that if you lose one of those other dental assistants, it's not as rough because you have that lead assistant. Because when you bring in the new dental assistant and they get through all their onboarding stuff, that lead assistant can get that person up and running and functioning on their own without it, all that problem blowing up all over the organization. I'm a fan of that, having people who are responsible for different zones of the organization that are great, that are competent, because then it becomes a lot easier to expand. Because conversely, let's say you have those 3 dental assistants working with your lead assistant. Let's say you have to add 2 additional assistants. Again, you've got that lead assistant, so they sort of take care of all of that for you, and you could apply this to different areas of the organization as well. So the reason why delegation leads to, better staff retention and longevity is, let's take one of the problems that you'll see from time to time. Let's say you have a treatment coordinator. So this person sits down with patients at the end of a consult or during the consult with you, and then they work out financial arrangements and wrap up the case, right? They get the office paid. And let's say you have an office manager. Well, your office manager used to be the treatment coordinator, then you hired a treatment coordinator. And the office manager has delegated most of the treatment coordinator functions to the treatment coordinator, but he or she keeps the big cases for themselves. Because those are exciting. Hey, I just collected $40,000. Hey, I just collected $10,000. So anything under $10,000, the treatment coordinator can see. Anything over $10,000, the office manager can see, or sees rather. So, I'd understand that if the treatment coordinator was messing up or flubbing the larger cases, I would get it. But then that's the office manager's job to make sure that they actually do it right. Okay. Obviously, if they can close cases up to 10,000, it really shouldn't be that big of a stretch to get them to close cases over 10,000, if we're just being real here. So, maybe they're putting a little bit more attention on those, the office manager, when the treatment coordinator's there, but it shouldn't be where the office manager's having to continually do this themselves, rather. But let's say the office manager just likes it. They like closing the big case. So you have the treatment coordinator sitting by idly, or the treatment coordinator talking to the patient, and then the office manager swoops in. They're essentially taking some of the cooler parts of the job away from the treatment coordinator. Do you see that? So, instead of the treatment coordinator walking out of the room going, hey, we just closed that $40,000 case, the office manager gets to go, hey, we just closed that $40,000 case. Now, that might be cool for the office manager. It's actually not as an executive, which I'll get into in a little bit. But for the treatment coordinator, it's a bit of a bummer because, that's a really cool, exciting part of their job. So now they get to do all the other stuff, but also all the mundane stuff, calling patients to reactivate them that have treatment outstanding. Maybe the stuff that isn't as fun as closing that $40,000 case. So you expect them to do all the mundane stuff, but you get to do the cool parts of their job. That's not a good recipe for long-term staff retention. So you'll actually hurt your retention if you don't give people the responsibilities that go along with the job, the ability to make, it's sort of like the meat of a job. Responsibilities, decisions. They see that there's growth associated with the job. There's a future with it. It's not going to be a very fun job for them. It could get even worse where you have somebody sort of standing around, and I've seen this, where you have a receptionist and the office manager is answering the phone while the receptionist stands there, and they know how to answer the phone. I'm not talking about somebody who doesn't know how to answer the phone. Essentially, you've hired this person, you're paying this person, but they're not doing a job. So in their heart of hearts, they know they're getting paid for not really doing much of anything, which you might think is what people want. Right? Well, I get this cushy job and I get paid and I don't have to do that much. It's actually not, because the person knows in their heart of hearts that they should be doing more. They're just not being allowed or being demanded to do more. If that was proper English, being demanded of to do more. So you're going to lose people if you handle them that way or you leave them underutilized. And then the fourth reason why you delegate actually has to do with how an organization is set up. So I want you to think with something. Every individual in your organization, in your company, has a certain value to your company. That value could be represented financially. So we do this with doctors, with production per hour and things like this. That's easy to think with. But every single employee has a financial value to your organization. Now, obviously, you would expect that value to be considerably more than you're paying them because you have overhead and things like that to meet. But not everybody is of the same value. Okay, doesn't mean they couldn't increase their value, but let's look at, if you take a snapshot of your current office, not everyone is of the same value. What determines somebody's value? Well, there's 3 things. Number 1, what is it that they do? Their skill set. Number 2 is their experience at doing whatever this thing is. And number 3, their competence at doing whatever this thing is. So let's apply those 3 things to a doctor for a second. So they're a doctor. So that's their skill set. They've been doing it for 7 years and they're really competent. Let's say this is an associate. Not only are they capable of doing all types of different procedures, but they do them very well and they do them very rapidly. Not to where it shouldn't be too quick, where it's too quick, but they do it in a way that's very efficient. So you have those three factors. That person potentially is worth a lot to your business, you see? But you can apply that formula to every other employee. So let's take an office manager as an example. You have an office manager and they're doing 3 jobs in the office in addition to being the office manager. They're the treatment coordinator, the schedule coordinator, the financial coordinator, and of course, they're the office manager. And they're overwhelmed. Well, if you were to rank the different things that they do, these different jobs that they do in the office, well, how much would you have to pay somebody to answer the phones or schedule patients? It's probably going to be a lot less than you're paying your office manager. And because they're doing all of these things, they're not able to fully, really do their job as a manager. And this is assuming you have an office that's somewhat growing, right? It's not like an office that's contracting. That's a whole different story. So in that case, you might break off one of these jobs, the easiest job to replace. And again, when I say easy, I'm not saying the job or no reflection of the capability of your person you're bringing in. It's just how hard is it to bring, let's say, a new schedule coordinator online versus a treatment coordinator. There's less to learn as the schedule coordinator than the treatment coordinator. And I'm sure people are arguing with me about this. Let's say it's not less to learn. The training lineup is a lot faster because yes, there's a lot to learn as a schedule coordinator, but as a treatment coordinator, in addition to learning about the office, I also have to know how to sell. Okay. So there's a little bit more to it. And not everybody comes in with an immediate ability to sell. Some people need more training than others. Everybody can learn to sell, but some people, let's be honest, have more of a inclination towards it, right? You might have somebody who's really good with numbers and very exacting with administration, but they're not really good at discussing financial arrangements with patients. So that might be more a financial coordinator doing insurance versus a treatment coordinator who has to sit down with a patient and get him to pay $15,000, you see? So in that case, the office manager might break off one piece of the job, schedule coordinator, all right, which then allows the office manager to focus on other things. This is assuming, again, that the office manager needs this extra time. But I think you're getting the idea in that the value per hour to the practice is better spent with the office manager focusing on their job as office manager and maybe as treatment coordinator. They're then trying to do all this and be the schedule coordinator at the same time. You could say the same thing with a dentist. If you're doing things that your assistant is permitted to do, and even worse, is able to do effectively. Let's say you have an assistant and in your state, your assistant is allowed to make temporaries. Okay. Let's say that's the case. Obviously, you have to know by your state or your area what your dental practice act, in the United States, you have a dental practice act for each state. You have similar things in Canada, and I'm sure they have them in other countries. But there's a specific outline of what a dental auxiliary or a dental assistant is permitted to do. So let's say your assistant is permitted to make temporaries and you're making temporaries. Okay. So let's say they can't make temporaries. Well, you got to teach them to make temporaries because you shouldn't be making temps if they can make temps or they're permitted to. Let's say they can make temps. They actually do a pretty good job at it and you're still making temps. Why? Because you like making temps. That's just foolish from a business perspective because as a doctor, your value per hour doing other things is far higher. You see? So you have to take a look at, when you're building an organization and you're delegating things, you're taking things that you don't have to do and you're giving them to people to do them. Now, there are rules associated with this, which I'll get into, in the next little section here. But the idea is you're not holding on to things that you shouldn't be holding onto. Okay? So let's move on to when you would delegate or maybe even when you would hire somebody. As far as when you would hire someone, usually I'm assuming if I'm hiring somebody, let me give you a little example here. Let's say you have 2 people handling your finance and insurance area. They're, they're doing, insurance verification. They're doing a treatment plan entry and insurance benefit estimates and things of this nature. And they collect co-pays when patients come into the practice. And you have a bigger practice. So there's 2 people there. And, you notice that your collections start to dip. At least from what these 2 folks are supposed to be doing. And they're dropping off. So you go and talk to them and they go, well, we've just gotten really busy. We need to hire a 3rd person. So again, paint the picture. Area is declining. You've had the same 2 people there the entire time. They were there while the area was expanding, and now they're there while the area is declining, or they were there where the area was maintaining, and now the area is declining. And the solution you're being presented with is hire a 3rd person. Now, unless something drastic changed with relation to how insurance is collected, or something along these lines, let's say that hasn't been the case. It's the same old. We just have less collections, even though we're producing more. Our collection percentage is starting to go down, and the solution being advanced is to hire the third person. I absolutely would not hire the third person. If I'm hiring another person, it's probably to replace one of those two people. Okay. So if I'm going to add people to it, because this is what the government does, and I'm not taking a political position here. As you know, MGE is apolitical, a-religious. We have people from all faiths, all political backgrounds or whatever. We're here for dental practice management. We want to teach you how to, improve conditions in your practice. That's why we're here. But my point being is this is what the government does. So area is not functioning. It's not functioning because the people there are making it not function. So let's hire an additional person. This is sort of just a government MO. Well, you're not the government. You don't have an unlimited funds. So you can't do this. You have to take a look at this and go, okay, I've got two people. They're not producing. They were producing. Maybe you can sort that out. But then their solution is I got to hire this third person. Again, I'm most likely replacing one of the two that are there. So when you're delegating or hiring a new person, one of the things I'm looking at is, do I need this person to support expansion? All right, I've got the office manager. They're completely overwhelmed. Well, we see this with our clients, actually, as an example. The office starts to grow, and the office manager has found someone to, answer the phone, schedule patients, handle insurance. Well, usually the last hat the office manager divests themselves of is the treatment coordinator job, because that is a little bit more, there's a bit more skill associated with that, right? The office manager is doing all the closing with the doctor. That's usually what we see with MGE clients as they're moving through the program. So once the office manager finds that they're spending, half their day, maybe more sometimes, being the treatment coordinator, it's probably time to get a treatment coordinator, because there's points of the office manager position they're not getting to, number one. And number two, there's probably parts of the treatment coordinator job they're not getting to, because, we've talked about this in one of our other episodes. I don't have the number in front of me here, but, what a treatment coordinator is and what they do. But beyond actually sitting in with you on case presentations and closing those cases, the treatment coordinator is supposed to be doing some outreach as well to bring people back into the practice. Well, if I've got that situation with the office managers being the treatment coordinator for half the time and the office manager for half the time, they're not fully doing the office manager job. They're also not fully doing the treatment coordinator job. So I need to find a treatment coordinator at that point and bring them in. Now, I mentioned not everybody has a bent for selling right off the bat. You can teach them, but they don't necessarily have a bent right off the bat. How am I going to find that treatment coordinator? I might take somebody within my current team that I could promote up. There might be a dental assistant who's good at this type of thing, because I probably have an easier time finding an assistant who can jump right in and get, oriented to the job than somebody that I don't have to train as a treatment coordinator. Or maybe my receptionist could be promoted or something, right? You could promote from within and then hire somebody else, or you might have to go out and just find a treatment coordinator. All right. You could apply this to other jobs too. It's not just the office manager. Let's say I have a schedule coordinator in a busy office, right? We've got four hygienists, 2.5 docs, a couple specialists who come a couple times a month. Well, hygiene starts to flag, because this is just too much to ask one person to do effectively. Sure, they're keeping up with the day-to-day traffic, but they're not able to do any outreach. Because let's say on top of that, I have 3,000 inactive patients. Well, there's only so much I can ask one person to do. Well, at that point, I might hire a hygiene coordinator to work with this, schedule coordinator, and they report to the schedule coordinator to ensure that I actually get the work done of that area so that it continues to grow. All right. So that tells you, if you're going to hire, that's what you're looking for. If you're looking to delegate, to me, the answer is very simple. If I'm doing something that belongs to another job that I have somebody for, let's say I don't have anyone, in which case I might need to hire them if the workload is adequate to justify hiring somebody. But let's say I have a schedule coordinator and I'm the office manager and I'm calling hygiene patients. Well, why am I doing that? Or I'm the treatment coordinator, as I mentioned earlier, and they're closing all the cases under $10,000, but I'm keeping the ones that are over 10. Why would I do that? These are not parts of my job. They belong with the treatment coordinator. At that point, I'm going to delegate this to them. There might be, random things I end up with too that belong within a certain place of the organization. But what this tells you that you need in order to make this work is you have to have a proper division of labor in the practice. You actually have to have a little bit of organization, a little bit of a system going on where you have people responsible for different aspects of the practice. We've talked about this in other episodes, but if you look at everything that goes on administratively in a dental practice, and not just administratively, you have dental assistants in the back, which in addition to assisting the doc, they have to order, do maintenance, they have to stock, in addition to working with the doctor, right? So these are areas or specific zones of control within a business. So in a dental practice, if you look at a front desk, you have answering the phone, you have scheduling patients, you have, if you take insurance assignment, there's verifying benefits, there's, estimating benefits, filing for insurance and so on. And if you're presenting treatment, you're going to want somebody who sits down and works with the patient to make financial arrangements. Then ideally you have a manager managing all of this. But each of these different areas of the practice have specific duties, they have specific functions, they have specific responsibilities, and even more importantly, they have a specific purpose and they have an expected outcome. That part's critical. So if you think about it for a second, if you hired somebody to be a treatment coordinator, why would you hire a treatment coordinator? Think of that for a second. Now, and again, I know that word has a lot of different meanings to different people, but let's just say that for a treatment coordinator, we're looking at somebody who is responsible for the income of the practice. Their job is to actually, close cases and get patients on the schedule. That's their job. Okay. So what would be the expected outcome? Why would I hire one? To increase my income and get more patients through the treatment plan. That's why I do it. So if I hire one and I'm not making more income and I'm not getting more patients through their treatment plans, then what are they doing? You see, same thing. Why do I have a schedule coordinator? I have them to fill the schedule effectively, efficiently, and productively. Patients show up on time for the appointment they're supposed to show up for and when they're supposed to show up. If I'm doing primary procedures in the morning, they're showing up in the morning. You get the general idea of this. But if you don't have specific assigned areas of responsibility, you're going to have trouble with delegating. Okay. Because what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up giving people, things to do that have nothing to do with their job, which, I was going to talk about a little bit later when I got into problems, but I may as well throw this out now. So for example, let's say, I want to send out postcards to prospective new patients in my area. And I go to my financial coordinator who doesn't have the statistic of new patients. And I go, I need you to send out these postcards. Why would I do that? That doesn't fit. But that isn't usually the setup in a dental practice. There is no specific, in a lot of offices, they're all people at the front desk. So I have 3 people at the front desk and I use them for different things, but nobody has a specific responsibility. Nobody has a specific outcome. They're not on a specific position. Their position is front desk. That's their position. They're named after the piece of furniture that they work behind. Okay. So again, we've talked about this in other episodes. When everybody's responsible for everything, the schedule, collections, etc., who's actually responsible? Nobody is responsible. So you have a big opening in the schedule. You walk up front. Who do you talk to? You have 3 front desk people. Whose job was it? I'm not saying that they're going to point fingers, but nobody really is on the hook for that. There is no accountability. So if you don't have, a proper setup organizationally, you're going to have trouble with this as far as delegating because you're not going to know where to delegate it if a person doesn't have a specific job with specific functions, responsibilities, and expected outcomes. All right. So, if I'm doing something that belongs to a certain job, I'm going to get that job to do it. Now, I've seen cases where you hire somebody, especially in this employment situation we find ourselves in the last 3 years. I've seen a lot of cases because it's tougher to find people, or has been, where people they settle rather than finding somebody who does what they're actually hiring them for. So you hire a scheduler, but they don't like calling people on the phone. So, you're the office manager. So you just keep doing that because they do all this other stuff. They'll schedule the patients in the office. That's more or less pointless. If you're hiring somebody, they're supposed to do the job you're hiring them for. That's sort of one of the prime requisites for hiring somebody. If you hire somebody to be a dental assistant, they're supposed to be a dental assistant, right? But then you have to be clear with what those expectations are. But anyway, so you have to have a clear division of labor if you want to be able to properly delegate. Otherwise, you don't know where to delegate to. Which sort of brings us, I started to run into this a little bit, into the problems. So we've gotten over when to delegate, but what are the problems with delegation? And the big problem, number one, is what I just described. You don't have a clearly outlined organizational structure. where you have your staff responsible for specific aspects of the office. And that goes down to, even the newest hire should have a specific thing they are responsible for. And what are they responsible for? They're responsible for several things. They're responsible for whatever the functions of that job are, the duties of that job are. They're responsible for achieving the purpose, why that job exists, and they're responsible to create the expected outcome of that job. So if I'm a new employee and you've made me the reactivation assistant, so you have 4,000 inactive charts and you go, Jeff, you're the reactivation assistant. Okay, cool. So you tell me, this is why you're doing this job. We have 3,000 inactive charts. It's important to keep patients coming back regularly in the dental office to maintain their oral health, and oral health is related to overall systemic health and so on. You would tell me, that's the reason I'm there. These are your responsibilities. Your responsibility is to get that inactive patient count down to 0, ideally. I mean, that's going to be some work, but that's your job. And this is the expected outcome. We expect to see all these inactive patients in the office. That's what we expect from you. So by doing that, you can already figure out how you're going to, measure my productivity. You're going to look at how many patients I get back, right? Easy enough. Now I'm a new hire. Well, you would expect if that applies to me, it applies to everybody in the practice. You see? So every specific person has to have those basic things, functions, duties, responsibilities, a purpose, and an expected outcome. And they need to know what that is. All right. So if you have that again, then you know how to delegate. If I get a call from an inactive patient, I can have that reactivation assistant call them back. You'd have me call them back to get them scheduled. I have a place to put that. If I have nowhere to put that, how am I going to delegate? I'm just giving it to random people, and I'm going to end up with a confused mess. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 with delegation is I have nobody to delegate to. That's pretty obvious. Or I have somebody who's not a good fit for the practice, right? So I have somebody who handles scheduling and I want them to handle a specific aspect of the schedule, but they're just not very competent at it. So I won't delegate because I know they're going to mess it up. Well, that answers your question for you right there. If I have somebody that I can't trust to delegate to, well, then I need to either look at what I'm doing as an executive, or I need to get somebody else that I'm comfortable delegating to. Now, one of the reasons that you might have trouble delegating to that person, you may not trust to delegate to them, has to do with how they're trained. You brought somebody in to handle the schedule. This is reason number 3 or problem number 3 with delegation. Maybe they're just improperly trained. They don't really know how to do their job. You haven't trained this person effectively. And, you're going to tell me you don't have time to train them, which I understand. I don't have time either. I don't know anybody that does. Because if you had all that time to train, you'd have no problems, right? That's what we always dream about. But everybody has problems finding time to train. This is not a unique issue, yet somehow some people figure it out and some people don't. If you don't train them, you're never going to get rid of that job. Let's take that office manager example. They have to do all the big cases, but their treatment coordinator can do all the small cases. That's a fine working setup in the beginning as I'm getting this person up and running. Thankfully, I've been able to get them to handle the small stuff, so I'm not called in every single time that someone needs to pay for their copayment on 2 crowns, right? But if they can't handle the big cases, I'm going to have a problem. Then I have to handle them. So assuming that they're able to handle some cases, you would expect I can eventually get them up to the point where they will be able to handle the bigger ones. Now that's going to take time. They're going to need to be trained. They may need some sales training. That's my shameless plug for the NGE communication and sales seminars, by the way. There you go. I'll put the link in the episode webpage. But they're going to need training, but it's going to take time for me to train them. I'm going to have to apprentice them. I'm going to have them in the room with me while I close the bigger cases and have them see what I do. They're going to ask me questions. It's going to take a lot of time. Well, you go, well, I don't have this time. Well, here's the truth. You could spend hours training this person. Now, you don't want to waste these hours, which I'll get into in a little bit here. But assuming this is a workable person, I'm going to spend hours training this person. Let's say I spend, 20 hours over the course of a couple months training this person personally. Well, that 20 hours I spent, if this is a good personnel, meaning somebody who's productive, will save me hundreds, if not thousands of hours in the long run. And then I get to do other parts of my job. So you have to break yourself of the idea that there is no time, because you're actually going to never build up competent people unless you spend the time to actually get them up to that point. It's going to take some time. You're going to have to build it into your schedule. If you're the doctor, and I've seen doctors who have been, they end up with hardly any staff left, or they lose a bunch of staff or whatever. Well, Yeah, you might have to schedule a couple less patients. And yeah, you might take a little bit of a hit on your schedule for a month or two. But if you actually spend this time, then it pays off in the long run. It's an investment. It's an investment, right? So that's the third thing, no training on the job. Now, number 4, problems with delegation has to be that whatever you're delegating has not been specifically explained well enough. You tell somebody, I need you to do task X, but they don't really understand what you want done. It's not very clear. And then they come back with an alteration of what you wanted, and then you get upset. Well, before I'd go doing that, I would take a look at, have I properly explained task X? Sabri was remarking the other day, because I've trained a lot of personnel, especially executive assistants. I've trained a lot of our executives here at MGE, and I spend time. And I'll get into this when we get into how to delegate. But if I'm going to give a person a specific task that relates to their job, I'm going to explain exactly what I want. Might even put it in writing. Here's exactly what I want. So there's no question as to what it is that I want, right? There's a little bit more to this, but that's one of the other reasons for delegation. You give somebody something to do. You don't explain it real well. And then you expect your staff to have telepathy and somehow read your mind to produce exactly what you wanted. Well, if you're not getting exactly what you want and you haven't explained it real well, there's your answer. If you have explained it real well and the person really understood it and then they still go off and mess it up, and that's a continuous thing, that's a different problem. Then maybe the problem is personnel. Okay. But number 4, if it's a specific task that you're delegating, you haven't explained it real well. Number 5th problem with delegation has to do with, you get this idea that nobody does it better than you, which in the long run is probably true. Probably nobody does do it better than you. It's a rare case. If you've had somebody, like you're the office manager, you've been killing it, you're doing a great job, and you hire a new employee, they're not going to do it as well as you, at least not in the beginning. Maybe even in the long term, they're not going to be as awesome as you are at it, because guess what? That's why you're the office manager. So how do you solve that? Well, you at least have to get them up to an acceptable level of productivity. In certain cases, I've seen people where it takes 2 people to replace 1 person. That is the case. And as long as that's financially viable, that's what you do, right? But what that can do, if you have that frame of mind, that you get the idea that it has to be as perfect as when you do it all the time, and I'm not saying to allow your standards to dip, okay? But if you get this idea, you can either A, get into, what micromanaging, where you're watching everything a person does to the point of being annoying, right? Or B, you just do it yourself. And then we get into that problem I described earlier. You're taking all the cool parts of the treatment coordinator's job away, or you're taking all the cool parts of the scheduler's job away, and you're not allowing them to do it. And then eventually it's just not a very fun or rewarding job, and they move on. Which brings us to the last point, which is very specific to office managers. So if we have any office managers listening, I'll throw this out here to you. Let's say you have a full organizational structure, and you've worked with the doctor since the beginning, and you've built this up. It was you and the doctor in the beginning. You were even being the dental assistant. Now you've built the thing up to where you have a receptionist, you have a scheduler, you have a PR director who's going out and getting new patients, you have a new patient coordinator who's handling all the new patient calls that are coming in, you have a hygiene coordinator who's handling hygiene, you have an insurance coordinator, you have 1 or 2 treatment coordinators. This is a busy office, right? You're still doing some of the treatment coordinating because, you wonder, once you've turned that over, what are you going to do? Well, what you're going to do is be an executive, and you're going to supervise. That's what you're going to do. That you're going to actually make executive decisions, because that actually has a lot of value. Okay. That has a ton of value to the organization financially. And you can get into that frame of mind, right? Like, what is your job as the office manager? To build a profitable, efficient organization with great service, not to be the treatment coordinator. So if you worry that turning over all those jobs and getting people to do them competently leaves you doing nothing, number 1, that's wrong. And, an MGE trained office manager knows that's wrong. They know exactly what an executive is supposed to be doing, right? And so does the doctor, by the way. But there's no doctor in the world, if you built up a big, huge, roaring, profitable organization like that, who's going to want to get rid of you. You've built up this huge, profitable, roaring organization. And that doesn't mean that you have to wreck it so that you have to hire a bunch of people again to justify your existence. Just run it and enjoy it. That's the reason you're there, okay, to help build up this organization. Those are the major issues where delegation fails, all right? So now let's take a look at, how do you effectively delegate? Now, I could do a seminar on this, but let's look at some basic things. Number 1, I need, a specific organizational structure. I need people who have specific jobs and have specific functions and responsibilities, because then I know what I'm supposed to delegate to them, right? Schedule coordinator. Obviously, anything relating to scheduling, I would delegate to that person. I then have to have workable people on those jobs. Now, if you've got a small office doing $30,000 a month and you're the office manager, the only person at the front, and there's maybe one or two dental assistants in the back and a hygienist, that doesn't mean you're going to go off and hire a bunch of people right now. Obviously, you'd be hiring, assuming the organization is expanding and you're starting to get overwhelmed, right? But if I'm going to delegate, I have to have those different jobs. I might be doing them all myself at this moment if I'm the office manager. But then I get to the point where we're expanding and now I need to go hire somebody else. So then I have to have workable people to delegate to. And I have to train these people and apprentice these people. So how do I train them? I'm going to have training materials to train them with, right? Whether that's policies in the office, a manual, a job description. On DDS Success, our online platform, we have positional training. And maybe it's not specific to your office, but it does cover the most important parts of pretty much every job, from scheduling to treatment coordinator, reception, financial coordinator. That helps a lot. When you're bringing in a new person, then you're going to have show them how certain things are done in your office and how your software works. This is not a short thing, right? But how do I know if this person's going to make it right off the bat? I've hired this person. I want to make sure they're a workable person so I don't have to sink 20, 30 hours into training them only to find out that they don't work out. Well, I'm going to give them things to do that are, maybe not super complex, because a job can be, especially a new job, they're kind of overwhelming, right? There's a lot going on. Think of the first day you had at your current job. You didn't know where things were. Where's the nearest restaurant if I want to get a sandwich? It's overwhelming. Right? As well as everything going on in the office, especially if you had no dental experience. So it's overwhelming. So give them something simple to do and see if they can do it. It might be call these patients and confirm them. That's not hard to train somebody to do. Okay. Or, call these patients to schedule them for their next hygiene appointment. Don't give them the really mean people. Give them some easy people to schedule. Now, why would I do that? I would do that to see, can the person follow instructions? Can they do something? So let's say I give them 10 patients to call who are pretty easy to schedule. I know they're easy to schedule. For whatever reason, their next hygiene visit wasn't scheduled. And they take, 3 hours to make 10 phone calls. Obviously, I'd probably do something about that before 3 hours elapse, but I'm being a bit exaggerative here. 3 hours to do 10 phone calls and they don't schedule anybody. That person's probably not going to make it because they couldn't execute a basic task. So why would I give them more complex tasks if they can't execute a basic task? There's a certain degree of reasonability in how long something should take, right? And if you're a manager, you know what I'm talking about here. If you're teaching someone how to answer the phone in your practice, I'm not talking about how to handle the different people calling, but just how to answer the phone. It's a great day at ABC Dental. My name is Jeff. I can help you. Okay. Whatever your greeting is. How long does it take to teach somebody to do that? 10 minutes, right? Until they have it down cold. Okay. Well, if you're into an hour with this person and it's dental office hello, they're probably not going to make it. If I can't train them on something simple, how am I going to train them on something more complex? Why wait? Why belabor the point? Why keep them employed for another 2 weeks and be more and more frustrated with all the other things I can't teach them to do? I essentially just have an employee that isn't functioning, and we're having to pay this employee, and they're really not being of any assistance or help to me. So that's sort of a litmus test for me. I'm going to give somebody, once I've oriented them to the office, they know where things are, and they have an idea of what they're going to be doing. And, I've gone over these things when I've hired them. If I can't get them to do basic tasks, this is when I'm actually working with them now. We're beyond the interview process where everything looked great. Now I'm actually seeing the rubber has hit the road. Can this person do the job? If I've given them a few simple things to do and they can't do any of them, it's probably not going to work out and I'm going to move on. You might go, wow, Jeff, that's really harsh. You're getting rid of somebody on day one. I've done it numerous times. And you know what? It's better for them too, believe it or not, because they know they're not working out and they're probably going to be looking for another job in the 2 weeks that you keep them while they're not functioning. Okay. Just not a good idea. It's frustrating for them and it's frustrating to you. It's also mean to them. All right. Why would if they're not going to work out, I know they're not going to work out. Why would I keep them? They should be looking for another job. Okay. So assuming they can do basic things, I can give them more complex things as I train them on their position. Right. And one thing that I find that is wildly out, meaning this is where I see executives get this wrong. Whether I'm training somebody on something or showing them how to do something, or I'm giving them a specific task that relates to their job. Maybe there's some data I want from the scheduler. All right. Or some information I want from the financial coordinator about the accounts receivable. Something I'm giving them a task that relates to their job. is the explanation of this task, especially if it's a new thing to do, is usually subpar. If I'm asking somebody to do something, and it's something Sabri remarked on this the other day when she was watching me talk to somebody, I spent a little bit longer than someone else might. And again, we get back to that time issue, right? But if I'm explaining to somebody, assuming this is not something they do routinely, but it's sort of a new task, right? It's something they haven't dealt with before, or I'm giving them something new, they're newer on the job. I'm going to explain what I want them to do in detail. I'm going to explain to them why I want them to do it. Why? Let's say you're training a receptionist and you tell them, you should have a smile on your face while you answer the phone. Okay. We've all heard that one before. Or be pleasant when you answer the phone or whatever. Why? You can tell them, have a smile on your face when you answer the phone, but why? Well, if you explain to them, look, we're trying to get a lot of new patients, right? We also want our patients of record to stick with the practice because we want to take care of people and improve people's oral health, function, and aesthetic. That's why we're here, right? Make sure they know what aesthetic means. Anyway, so it's not a word that's used very commonly in, the world. So you tell them, okay, so why is it I want you to be super pleasant, have a smile on your face when you answer the phone? Because you are the first point of contact with this practice, especially with a new patient. They have never met us before. You are the first impression they have of this office. So if it's a bad impression, that makes us all look bad and we may lose the patient. Okay. And that kind of violates why we're doing what we're doing and why you're here. So it's important that people feel welcome. You're friendly. You want people to feel that way. You want them to feel like, I want to go into that office. That's why I want you to do that. Okay. Then I'm going to show them how to do it. And I'm also going to show anybody when I'm giving them a task, what's important about that task and what is not important about that task. That sounds kind of silly in a way, or what's kind of whatever. That goes back to, and I brought this up in last week's episode, the definition of the word understanding. What does understanding mean? To grasp the meaning and significance of something. What does it mean? And what is the significance of it? Meaning, is it important? Is it not important? What parts of it are important? And the example I used last week is if you walked into a practice, if you listen to this, I'm sorry for repeating it. If you walked into a practice, and you saw the front desk, there was somebody at the front desk waiting for the receptionist and their phone's ringing. So you have someone standing at the front, the phone's ringing, and the receptionist is filing a chart. Let's say this office still has paper charts. You look at that and you go, what is wrong with that receptionist? Because, it's very obvious to prioritize what's most important. The patient standing at the front desk, we handle them first, then we handle the phone and file charts when we have time. You see? So they're focusing on the unimportant rather than on the important. So if you're giving somebody something to do, show them specifically, like, what's the most important aspect of it? You see? So if I'm having somebody confirm a schedule and I go, look, obviously I want all of these patients to show up, but do you see these two patients here? They haven't responded to our texts yet. All right. And you've at least gotten to the point where you're comfortable with this person calling for these larger procedures. These two patients are in primary time. These are large procedures. This is most of the doctor's production for that day. I need you to really get a hold of these people. This is critical. They need to be reached because if we don't reach them by X time, we're going to have to start looking for a way to replace those patients or the doctor's day is going to be blown out. That's critical. Not that everybody else is unimportant. That isn't the point. But that's sort of the production that is anchoring your day. So assuming you're comfortable delegating that, and you're the OM, you don't go, heck, I'm just going to get on the phone and call myself, then they have to understand those are the two important ones. Otherwise, they're going to come back and go, okay, well, hygiene's all confirmed. And I confirmed that those 3 denture relines in the afternoon. What about those 2 people in the morning? Oh, I couldn't reach them. It's 5:00 and this is tomorrow. So a person should know the importance level of different aspects of the task, not so that they can ignore other things, but so that the parts that you thought were really critical get done. Okay? So essentially, you want them to understand the task you're giving to them. All right. So now, a couple final points of warning on this delegating a task to somebody thing. Be wary of going too far. You may have, everybody's different. Some people get it faster than others. Some people grasp things faster than others. This isn't like a judgmental statement. It's just, it is what it is. Some people pick up things quicker than other people, and that's fine, and that's great. But you don't want to over-explain to somebody who's got it, because then that can come across as annoying. But then on the conversely, you don't want to under-explain something, which is the problem most people have, right? And keep in mind, when you're giving somebody something new, that can be overwhelming, right? And a person doesn't want to be the cause of a screw-up, right? They want to you ensure they're comfortable. They got it, and they're able to go do it. And again, sure, it takes time to do these things. Maybe you're spending that 30 minutes, but remember that 30 minutes, especially if it's a new function of a job that you're giving somebody to do, it's something you want your dental assistant to do every week, for example, and you as the doctor spend 30, 45 minutes really making sure they understand what you want. Well, once they get it, you never have to explain it again. Maybe you have to correct them once in a while, but now again, you've saved yourself that little bit of time you invested, saved yourself tons of time in the long run. All right. So again, when we're turning things over, make sure the person is actually capable of executing a task, and then make sure people are actually trained to what you're asking them to do. And if you're giving them things to do, make sure they truly, really understand not just how and what, but why they're doing it. All right. So now you've delegated all the aspects of the treatment coordinator job to the treatment coordinator. How do you manage this treatment coordinator? How do you make sure they're doing their job? You don't want to come across and ask them everything they're doing. Otherwise you're starting to take away, it becomes a bit of a hassle. You're taking away from the fun of doing their job. Well, how would we manage and perform oversight? Well, the first thing you need is statistics. You would also communicate. You would also look. All right, but let's take a look at statistics for a second. Let's say I have a new patient coordinator or a schedule coordinator, someone answering my new patient calls, okay? Well, I would look at, if I keep the statistic of new patient calls versus conversions, I can know whether I have a problem or not. So if I'm getting 100 new patient calls a month and we convert an average of 50 to 60 of these, and then, 1 month that dips down to 40, well, then that shows that bears investigation. Now I'm going to have to go look into what's going on in this area. I might have to start listening to new patient calls, which you should do regularly. But you could also make that a bit of a burden on yourself. Like, I'm going to listen to every new patient call forever. That's unreal, right? But I'm using statistics as sort of a monitor to determine, well, should I be sticking my nose into this thing? I'm using statistics as a monitor, right? Well, conversions have dropped. They used to be 50 to 60 out of 100 calls. Now I'm getting 100 calls and only 40 have converted. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to look at what's going on. You could use that with the schedule. If all of a sudden productivity drops or I have large openings on the schedule, right? I'm going to go and look at what's happening. Treatment coordinator. We're closing less cases that we should have closed. I'm going to go in and look at what's going on. Now, when I go and look at what's going on, am I going to just go talk to the person? Sure, I'm going to talk to them to kind of get their take on it, but I'm still going to look and figure it out for myself. Because let's say the closes have dropped off and I talk to the treatment coordinator. And remember, one thing about people is, most of the people you're going to hire they're good, productive people, right? They're good people. You will have some people who are not super productive. We get those, but it's a very small percentage that you're going to hire, right? That are just not able to perform. Most people you'll hire have the capability to perform and they really want to perform. But then again, people also are going to tend to justify their ineffectiveness, is what I have found, right? So you'll go and you'll talk to your treatment coordinator and they're not closing anybody. And what are they going to tell you? Oh, well, so-and-so finance company isn't approving anybody, or, people are worried about this, so they don't want to pay, or this or that or whatever. Don't just buy that answer. I'm going to want to check this out for myself because they may just be missing the boat. You see, I might have to correct something about their ability to sell at that point. Maybe they're not, maybe they ran into a patient who was nasty and made them feel bad about asking for money. And so they stopped asking for money. Who knows? But I'm going to dig in and look at what's actually going on, because this is also where you might find you have a problem. Let's say I have a new schedule coordinator and then I end up with all these openings on the schedule. I'm going to figure out why. Well, what happened to this person? They were confirmed. Oh, they said they were coming. You call the patient. You find they never responded to a text or an email. You call the patient. They go, I had no idea I had an appointment. Well, this person's lying to you at that point. You see, that's kind of a worse example of this versus the treatment coordinator example. Okay. But I use statistics as a means. It's sort of like having your oil gauge, your speedometer, all these little gauges you have in your car. This is why you have them. They tell you, is my car overheating? Is my oil pressure too high? Am I going too fast? Am I going to get stopped for speeding? They tell you what's happening. That's why you use statistics. But then beyond statistics, you're talking to people, you're communicating with people, and you're actually looking as to see what's going on. So I guess the upshot is you're going to have to build in time for this. And I can't, again, I could go into it again, but I don't want to make this too long. You have to build in time not only to make sure that you train and put people on the job, but you also have to build in time to look at statistics on a daily basis and look at where your practice is going regularly and have some oversight or some monitors to see what's happening. You could just, as a final thing, let's say you hired somebody to pay your bills or do your finances. You could just go, well, they're going to handle it, because you could over delegate. Let's say as the doctor, you're responsible ultimately for everything, but let's say you're responsible for the financial health of the practice. So you give the bill payment and everything to somebody else and you don't even look at what's in the accounts anymore. Well, you're going to be in financial trouble pretty quick. you have to have some level of oversight, whether it's statistics or looking or communicating. And that's how you're able to delegate and build up these folks who actually do a good job. And then what's great, here's the coolest part of this, is when you have somebody, that treatment coordinator, that schedule coordinator, whoever it is, and they're doing an awesome job, they build up wins. You know, I've mentioned this before where we'll have a client who comes to us and they're doing $80,000 a month. And you go, what would you like to be doing? I'd like to be doing 120. Then they do 120 and it's very easy. I go, wow, it was a lot easier than I thought. Now I want to do 150. Now, if you had talked to them when they were doing 80 and you said you should do 150, they would have looked at you like you're crazy. There's no way I could do 150. Well, they had that win where they hit 120. Now they know 150 is possible. That same concept applies to your team. They have a win doing what you're asking them to do. That treatment coordinator is closing those bigger cases. Now they can close other bigger cases. You say, so give your team some wins by giving it to them, you know, bit and piece, and so that they actually pick things up and they're able to do it, and then monitor them once you've delegated and given them things to do. All right. Well, that was a lot longer than I initially conceived. I hope it wasn't too long, but I hope it did help. I'll put the links for our online platform, DDS Success, which I mentioned, and the MGE Communication and Sales seminars. You should definitely check those out, especially if you want to learn to increase case acceptance or train your team. Also, if you want to just learn more about this, you know, how to be a better executive, how to set up an organizational structure, how to manage by statistics, I recommend you check out the MGE Power Program. I'll put a link to that as well, because it's a very intense program. It's not for everybody. It's 78 days of training for a doctor and office manager, but it turns out a real executive at the other end, and the results are pretty much unparalleled. You know, at 5 years after doing the program, people see a 232% increase, right? So I'll throw all that in there. There's my obligatory commercial. Again, folks, I hope this helped. If you have any questions about, us and you want to find out more, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.